Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on experiences with Michigan Community Solar. My name is Sarah Lee, and I am the Clean Energy Engagement Specialist at the University of Michigan's Graham Sustainability Institute. The Clean Energy and Energy Management webinar series was developed in partnership with the State of Michigan's Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, to help highlight the work that Michigan communities are already undertaking with respect to energy efficiency and renewables. By providing local governments with practical advice for taking action related to clean energy, we hope to demystify the process a bit for other jurisdictions, and show that these actions are possible and happening in communities big and small across the state. So if you've joined us before, you know that we'll take your questions via the questions feature near the bottom of the GoToWebinar console, which should be on the right side of your screen. And I encourage you to submit any questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar by entering them into this questions field. And when you submit a question, it'll only be visible to myself, so don't panic if you don't see any other questions populating. So for today's webinar, I am delighted to introduce Carl Hosch, a doctoral student from the University of Michigan School for the Environment and Sustainability, who will provide an overview of all the different community solar pathways currently within Michigan. He will then be joined by a few Michiganders who have firsthand experience installing community solar projects within the state, Kevin Downs from the Marquette Board of Light and Power, and Dr. John Kinch from Michigan Energy Options. After their presentations, I will share your audience questions and try to weave in as many as I can. So with that, I will turn things over to Carl. Thank you for joining us today, Carl.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
All right, switch in control over to you.
Wonderful. Wrong window. Can you see my presentation?
Yep, perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and so I'm very excited to share what I've learned about it and to provide some guidance as you move forward. And I'm excited to hear also from our experts at the end of the panel as well. My presentation can be broken down into these 4 parts. I'm going to first start out with a few key terms just so that we can be all on the same footing with regard to what I mean when I talk about community solar and what are some of the terms that are used. Then I want to share some rationale for why you might consider community solar for your locality. We'll then do a high-level overview of what community solar looks like in Michigan right now, and then a few considerations that you should look at as you're thinking about community solar, and those will definitely be built upon by our next couple panelists as well. So defining community solar can actually be a surprisingly tricky endeavor. I wanted to start with this first definition, which is what the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, uses in their studies. And I use this because I also use their data later in this presentation to talk about what community solar is present in Michigan already. So they describe it as a product where the financial benefits of a single solar photovoltaic array are distributed among an exclusive group of customers that have chosen to subscribe in the program. So financial, exclusive, and chosen are underlined because those are the key elements for them, that there needs to be a financial benefit for the subscribers, that it's not the entire utility customer base, but an exclusive group, and that those people have opted in. I want to share a few additional terms that are helpful and that are often used to describe community solar, and this might also shed some light on the fact of why community solar is kind of a slippery concept. So the first is community shared solar, or shared solar. Sometimes it's just shared. And this definition gives a little bit more of a picture of what it might look like. So this is a solar electric system which provides power and or financial benefits to subscribing members. Often they receive credits on their electric bills for their portion of energy generated by their panels. The panels are in an array off-site, meaning they're not physically on the subscriber's home. And in this case, community is flexibly defined. So it could be a location like a township or a city, or it could simply be that people are connected in some way, for example, through their utility. Community scale solar refers to the size of a solar electric system which is smaller than a large utility scale system, which is often above 5 megawatts, but also larger than most individually owned rooftop systems that would be on someone's home. Solar gardens are also another term that often describes either community solar or community scale solar. And this last point, I think, is important, that there are those who believe that true community solar implies a more direct link to the physical location of a community scale solar system within the geography of a community. So it's in your community, your subscribers can see it and attach meaning to it. Or it also implies some level of community level ownership and decision making, so that residents who are subscribing to it have a say in how the program is designed. And often these terms are used interchangeably, and there are also other terms that I haven't mentioned here. So next, I'd like to share a little bit about why you might consider community solar. So community solar arrangements allow customers to enjoy the advantages of solar energy without having to install their own energy system. So community solar can serve renters or homeowners with insufficient solar resources. For example, my pastor at my local church posted recently that he is in an argument with his wife because he doesn't want to cut down the trees in their yard, but she wants solar on their roof and it's too shaded. Community solar would be a great option for them. Or some people don't have the upfront capital or the creditworthiness to be able to invest in community solar on their roof, and so don't have access to the benefits of renewable energy. I also think that community solar really fits into the three legs of sustainability. And if you're not familiar with those are typically described as environmental benefits, economic benefits, and social. So community solar has the ability to remove carbon that would otherwise be put into the atmosphere from other fossil fuel energy sources. Usually, it can provide an economic benefit to a community or to some subscribers where they actually are getting a payback over time, and it benefits them financially rather than just getting their energy in a different way. The piece that's most important to the work I do at the University of Michigan is the social piece, and that's because community solar can really be a lever for energy justice. And there's two particular pieces that I think are really important: distributional justice, the way the benefits and burdens of our energy system are spread out among the people who use energy, and also procedural justice, and that's how people are involved in the process of making decisions. Community solar gets some of the benefits of renewable energy in the hands of people who are typically borne a lot of the burdens of our historic energy system, whether that's through the pollution or high prices. And it can lower energy burdens, which is the percent of a person's income that they spend on energy. It also gives them a chance to have a say in the process. And that is why I'm a big advocate for community solar and why it might be a good asset for your community. Currently, community solar in Michigan is found in about 11 different community solar arrays. And you can see on the left that those are spread among the three different types of utility model that we have in Michigan. I put a little sun over the general location of where each of these solar arrays are. And this map also I took from the LEED tool that's provided by the Department of Energy that also shows by county what energy burdens are present in that county. So energy burden, again, is the percent of income spent on energy. So a darker color means that people are spending a much higher percentage of their income on energy, and that's a high energy burden. And that's where community solar could be very useful. You'll also see that the arrays on the side kind of vary in terms of their overall size, how much output they're producing. So I have that broken down here into a pie chart among the three different utility types. So while we have about an equal spread among municipal utilities, cooperative utilities, and investor-owned utilities, the investor-owned utility community solar arrays currently have a lot more capacity. And that's where you can kind of get into this gray area of when is it community solar versus when is it utility scale solar, and who sees the financial benefits of those systems. I also think it's helpful to see Michigan within the context of the national picture of community solar. And community solar is really experiencing an uptick over these last few years, and there's a lot of anticipated capacity that will come online in the coming years. Currently, Michigan is right about in the middle of the pack, ranked 21st for the amount of installed community solar capacity, with about 7,706 kilowatts installed, or about 7.7 megawatts. Now, to put that into comparison, the state that's leading with the most community solar capacity is the state of Minnesota, and they have 663,000 kilowatts or 663 megawatts. One big distinction among all the states is that there are 21 states plus the District of Columbia that have a type of legislation that enables third-party ownership of community solar. And this means that someone other than the utility could own this community solar array. And that's something that Minnesota, New York, California have, and that allows for third-party ownership, and that can have some benefits in terms of the financial implications for the community solar array. Michigan currently does not have that legislation, although there are 2 bills that are currently in the Michigan legislature that are being considered that would establish that enabling legislation. I want to highlight 3 particular community solar projects that I had the opportunity to work on in Michigan that also illustrate a couple of the unique aspects of what can be done with community solar. And actually, I was on a meeting last week where I got to hear from John Kinch, who we're going to hear from a little bit later, and he shared, and I think this is very, very particular and a good explanation of community solar, that no community solar project is the same as another. They are all very unique. And so as we talked about definitions early on, and as I described these, you'll come to realize that each one has its own particular nuances. So these 3 community solar projects were under a project called the Clean Energy for Low-Income Communities Accelerator, also known as CELICA. That was a project that began with the Department of Energy in partnership with what was then called the Michigan Energy Office and is now the Energy Services section at the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And essentially what this project allowed the Michigan Energy Office to do was to partner with a utility, and they decided to try each of the different utility models. You'll see there's a cooperative utility, a municipal utility, and an investor-owned utility. And they wanted to work at the intersection of energy efficiency and community solar. So they worked with these utilities, but also with community action agencies, which were deploying the National Weatherization Program, which provides energy efficiency services for low-income households. And these households that had gone through weatherization were then also able to access community solar subscriptions. So they would receive a credit on their bill. And that is one of the models that is possible with community solar, is that you can subscribe to panels. You know, maybe you own them, maybe you just subscribe, so you're essentially leasing them over the life of the panel, and you get the benefits of the energy that is produced by the panel on your bill credit. So in the Cherryland Cooperative Project, 50 households were given these panels through a grant from the Michigan Energy Office. The Village of Lantz did something slightly different, where the credits also paid back part of the cost of the subscription. So while the subscribers received some credits on their bill, part of it was also used to pay for the subscription for the panels. And the consumer pilot is actually going to kick off in the near future. It's a shorter term pilot with Consumers Energy Solar Gardens, but provides for immediate energy burden relief in the form of these community solar subscriptions while low-income households are going through this process of weatherization. So I share these 3 in particular to just show that there are a lot of different models out there, and partnership with different entities, I think, is a really important way to get these projects off the ground. I want to close with just a few considerations that you should think about as you are getting ready to start your own community solar project. And the first is just the importance of keeping the community in community solar. There is a term out there that you may be familiar with called greenwashing, where things that aren't necessarily helpful for the environment can be packaged in a way that seems like they're helpful in order to get certain credits or things. There's a similar term for community washing, where something could be called community solar, but it could be very removed from a community. It might not benefit the community in the way it could. So one of the important things that you might consider doing is to engage community members in every stage of the process. And I know our future panelists will be talking about this as well, but move beyond consultations and invite them as much as you can into the decision making and thinking creatively about the project. This can also ensure that your project is designed to meet the needs of your community. Also, it's possible to work with developers to make sure that you can maximize the benefits for your community, whether that means employment opportunities in the community or financial benefits in the form of tax credits that can really make these affordable. And that plays into the next consideration, which is I think that the best use of, or maybe the most bang for the buck of community solar is that it can really benefit low to moderate income households. Obviously, not all community solar subscribers are LMI households, but they have the most to gain, and that relates to the high energy burdens that I talked about a little bit earlier. They also typically are the ones who have faced the most obstacles to obtaining solar energy in the past. So they might have low credit scores, they might have an insufficient tax burden to benefit from the current state and federal tax incentives to install solar on their home. The historic solar business models have required that somebody own their home or have a good, strong roof to put solar on their roof without too much shading. So the fact is that many people in the LMI community are renters living in multifamily units with limited access to capital. And as the electric grid becomes more renewable, some of the costs of that transition could fall on people who don't have access to renewable energy. And traditionally, these are people who've borne the brunt of a lot of other aspects of our energy system. So these are people that should be considered whenever you're planning a community solar array. There are a lot of ways to do this, and I'm just touching the surface of this, but there are ways to make carve-outs for low LMI subscribers, or if you're able to access a large anchor tenant who can guarantee a subscription of a certain number of panels, that can make that more affordable for LMI subscribers. You might consider trying to site a project near an LMI neighborhood or on a brownfield or donated lands that can reduce the overall costs. There are also some particular financing models that can benefit LMI households, such as on-bill financing, or like in some of the Celica models, having some grant funding that pays for some prepaid subscriptions. The last consideration I wanted to share is you might be in a locality that is served by an investor-owned utility. And in many ways, there's some things that make it easier when you're working with a municipality or a cooperative utility to get those community solar arrays placed in your neighborhood. It might be a bigger challenge if you're working with an IOU. One example of how this could work is that over the last year, the city of Ann Arbor has been working to implement community solar, but is served by DTE. And through its involvement in DTE's voluntary green pricing program, Ann Arbor was able to become an intervener in the Michigan Public Service Commission cases. And through the resulting settlement, was able to work out a deal with DTE that DTE would support a community solar pilot program on a capped landfill in Ann Arbor. So there is a precedent for how this would work. This hasn't actually launched yet. The goal is that it would kick off next year. But this project itself would actually triple the capacity of community solar in Michigan. If you're in a consumer's territory, Consumers actually has 3 solar garden sites that are available for community shared solar subscriptions. So you could direct people to those. And it's possible that further negotiations could be made to benefit your community itself. I'm going to stop there. I know there's a lot more detail that we can share, but I look forward to answering questions at the end of our presentation. And I will kick it over to the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Carl. I would now like to introduce Kevin Downs from Marquette Board of Light and Power.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you for trying to get my camera adjusted here. Having me and allowing me to speak on our experiences that we've had with our community-owned solar garden. We were alerted by our customers. Actually, we're a municipality. We have roughly 18,000 customers. We serve the city of Marquette and 9 portions of 9 surrounding townships. We actually had concerned citizen groups approach us through our board meetings. We have a 5 board member panel through our board meetings and community comment portions as early as probably the early 2000s, but this really got some wheels on it about 2015, 2016, when we realized that this was something that we would be able to do and dovetail in to some other construction projects we had. Our initial concern and the concern of our citizens non-participating ratepayers was that they did not have cross-subsidization. So we began with looking at basically a right size array. We wanted an array that wasn't so big that we had to pay for it with people who weren't participating. So we identified early on that we wanted those participating members' dollars to pay for the project. Obviously, we had to then solicit interest, which we did by going to through our board meetings, through local media, through radio, through all of the methods of media that were available to us to urge people to come forward and voice their interest. We also set up our website to collect information so that myself and others that were involved in the project could call them back, get specifics, to present the data to our board to see if this was going to go forward. So we had identified that the right size for the Marquette Board of Light and Power was roughly a 400 panel community-owned solar array. We began, to contact engineering companies, solar engineering companies. We did, at the same time, we initiated a rate study through our rate consultant to see if the financial end of this was going to be feasible, if the cost was going to be prohibitive to folks who may want to participate in the solar garden. In our solar garden, our model is there is no cross subsidization. We did not set up any type of financing for our customers. We wanted to get the rate per panel as low as possible. The customer owns the panel. We own the land underneath it, held in a community environment. We do the maintenance on the system. We carry an insurance policy on the system. We monitor the system for anomalies and contract with our installing contractor to replace a panel or an optimizer or whatever would need to be done. Another item we identified early on is we wanted to make sure that we had very clear and very irrefutable data on the generation of the solar system. So we went with 3 different methods of measuring the electricity produced that goes back into our system. At that point, we identified that if we had X amount of participants, say we have 400 panels, if we had 400 participants, that the generation overall from the solar garden would be split 400 ways. And whether they own 1 panel or more, that they would have a share per panel, and then that would be a credit on their bill. We have a very low production. We knew this after we had done a solstice study, had that commission that, and actually had 2 of them done, and we're satisfied that we could generate enough electricity on the site that we have here on the shore of Lake Superior to make this work. We wanted to make sure that we didn't sell a bill of goods, if you will, to our customers, that they would not see a payback on their investment. So the investment was a 25-year purchase for the panels they own, and the return on investment is about 18 to 20 years, depending on how much cloud cover, snow we have, whatnot. Parallel to that, we had to decide where we were going to place this. We did have land available adjacent to our Marquette Energy Center, which was under construction at the same time, which is a natural gas generation site to replace our coal-fired plant that we operated on the shore of Lake Superior for many, many years, decades. So this was under construction at the time anyway. Folks, again, we're a municipality. We have a lot of input from our customers, a lot of opinions and a lot of questions. We had to identify point man or point person, if you will, that could answer the majority of the questions, while realizing that every employee who wears the Marquette Board of Light and Power shirt is going to be running into people in the community. So we had an education program for our employees, all of our employees, both management and labor, with right information and the right amount of information to disseminate out through the community. We also initiated an outreach program, first through our website, but boots on the ground. We went to the 9 townships that we serve portions of, and we spoke at their township meetings. The information well advertised in advance, had varying levels of participation from the citizens in that, but we returned again and had a second meeting at those townships. We reached out to multiple community service groups, from the Kiwanis to different businesses or different clubs that were business owned and business oriented. Also through information meetings with public school, university, any groups that were interested, we made sure that we were available with the same information, preferably with the same presenters, but the same information, homogeneous information, because we really found that there was a lot of disinformation in our community. People were posting their own opinions or their not through any malice, but just disinformation. A lot of folks were really surprised that this project didn't cost them anything if they weren't participating. We really were proud of that, and we shouted that from the rooftops. If you don't want this, it's not going to cost. It's not going to be on your bill. And that took down the level of any anxiety that the citizens may have felt at the time. We were also doing this in conjunction with a rate study for our regular rates, so we were very careful about the information we put out so that it wasn't misconstrued. We also approached our largest customers, knowing that they may or may not participate in this. Largest customers being universities, the city of Marquette school system, just to keep them on board with what we were doing, whether they were participating or not. We wanted to have their support. We felt them out after information presentations, felt them out and garnered their support. If not, we wanted to make sure there wasn't large customers with a large footprint, with a large voice in the community that had any reason to oppose the project. While this was going on, we did establish a cost. At the start we said, we don't need at the time we don't need the energy, the clean energy RECs, because the way our system is constructed with hydros and whatnot, it wasn't an issue at the time, but it could be in the future. We had to be clear about that, how it would pay off. As I said, we did have land adjacent, and as a footnote to that, that land was property that the citizens hiked on. We had an improved trail system on there. We partnered with a local trail club, improved trails on that system that they lost access to. Pardon me. So we had to create some other trails, which we were happy to do on some other land we had. There was just a lot of moving parts and a lot of, I wouldn't say special interest groups, but there was a lot of groups that had their own interest. It amazed me how much public comment and how much the amount of questions that were generated by different groups within our community were generated with this. When you think of community owns solar generation, you think who would oppose that? It's a elegant and financially feasible, and it makes perfect sense in that, but you will find that there are some groups within your community or within your customer base that will have questions. If you can answer those questions concisely, have an answer ahead of time, and allay their fears. It'll go a long way to making your project a lot easier. We had garnered community support. We had initiated a cost of service study. We wanted to know what the energy that we generated was going to be worth in dollars and cents, and how that would equate into the program to, again, to go back to how is this going to pay itself off? Are we charging enough? Are we crediting too much? Because we also have a lot of individually owned solar sites. We didn't want to just say, well, that rate's good for the customer who has his own solar panels, so we're going to use the same rates. It didn't work that way. We zero out our credits every year with what we call a shoulder month, which is the kind of the not the dead of winter when customers are using their credits, and it's not summer when they have their highest generation. So, you know, April is our shoulder month that we zero out their credits. And to date, all of our customers use all of their credits. We have customers that buy one panel because they feel very strongly that they want to participate in solar generation. They live in an apartment, as Carl mentioned earlier. They have shaded property. They don't want to cut trees. They don't have enough of a yard to put up a big array on that. So it was a great vehicle for those customers of ours who didn't want solar panels on their property, but they did want to participate in solar generation. Those customers ranged from people with a strong feeling of reducing their carbon footprint to groups that would purchase panels and actually give them through community fundraising efforts to low-income families or low-income service industries to reduce their bill. We were happy to participate in that and act as a liaison in a lot of cases. Probably the biggest community supporter, the people who initiated this spoke the longest and the loudest at the beginning. We were surprised to find we're not participating in the purchase of solar panels. We thought they'd be sold out in 2 months, and we've been just coming up on 4 years of production now, and I still have a very small amount. I have 400 panels and 370 of them are sold, but we have a very small amount of panels that still remain unsold. People don't live in their homes as long as they used to. They have run the numbers, and some of them have decided it's a better investment to put solar generation on their own property, various reasons. We set up our program, and this may be something that other utilities want to consider. They own the panel. It's a piece of real estate. They were allowed to participate in tax incentives to do so. We did not have, we didn't offer subsidies. We didn't offer, as I said earlier, any type of a finance program or anything. That was upon the customer to do that, but there is a lot of information available. We could direct them to different groups that would be, you know, energy optimization groups that we already are partnered with to advise or steer them in the right direction. But we didn't want to pressure or make a financial statement that may prove out to be not completely accurate, you know, 20 years down the road or something. Our purchase agreement was a 25-year purchase. At that point in time, the panel is thought to be pretty much outdated and non-productive. We think that they'll pay off, as I stated, in about 18 to 20 years. And you know, depending on how many panels or shares they own in the community solar garden, those remaining years are free electricity, I guess it would be a way to put it. But it's not free. Our distribution cost is about double what our avoided cost is. So we felt it was fair to all of our customers if we can buy electricity off of the grid or generate it through our own generation. We would not be crediting a solar participator with a higher number than we would pay to get electricity anywhere else. For those panels that are not sold, they are still owned by the Marquette Board of Light and Power, and they become part of our renewable energy portfolio, just like any other asset that we have. We had garnered community support. We answered a lot of questions. We had a lot of meetings in various city, from the city manager to the city commissioners to all of the township boards and their members. I mean, everything from we had school kids come out, and we felt like we had a pretty good plan, and we knew what we were getting into. We initiated the construction, the contract that was at our cost, with the thought that we would recoup that with the sale of the panels, which, as I stated, we have, other than the several panels that remain unsold. We allow customers to buy as many panels as they can. We've had some corporations buy quite a few panels, and we've had as low as one panel. We don't, if they move anywhere else on our system, the panel ownership will follow them. They can gift the panel to a family member. If it's somebody who becomes deceased, that panel is part of their estate, and it can be used to resold or used to gift to someone in their family or their favorite charity, as long as they're a customer on our system. We had quite a bit of that, as a matter of fact. A lot of people were buying them for their favorite charity. It was really nice to see folks doing that. We wanted to make our panels as low as cost as possible. At the time, we kept them under $500 per panel, so they were $498. And as the panels age, the years of production go down, and the panel goes down in cost to the customer. So those $498 panels are now $420 or $410. There's a sliding scale that we use for the cost of the panels. The metering, we felt very strongly about that, because, as I stated, we wanted to have very clear reports we could give both the participating customers, non-participating customers, and federal government or anyone who is looking for energy information on us. We used a conventional electronic meter. We used a solid state measuring system, which basically it gives us a computer readout on the output. And then we used an SEL meter, which is a substation style meter. That data feeds directly into our Market Energy Center, where we monitor production from our hydros and our reciprocating internal combustion engines as well. It becomes another part of our generation asset. And then we push that data through our contractor or through our supplier. We push that data out to a website so that our customers are able to see the daily production of the solar garden as a whole. We don't monitor each panel, and most customers don't know which panel is theirs, although they do actually own a panel. It's our job as the utility to make sure all the panels are up and running and working, monitor that, make sure that the optimizers and all the electronic equipment, including the meters, are working properly, and we continually monitor that daily and contract for any improvements. A couple of the problems we ran into that we hadn't really thought about was the maintenance of the panels. Maintenance costs at this point have been very low, about $2,500 a year for site maintenance, as a matter of fact. Could we do it over? I'd have put the panels up 10 feet higher in the air. They're a little low on the leading edge. We actually have to send technicians out a couple times in the winter to remove snow, because the snow will build up as it slides off the panels, and it'll shade the lower panels, reducing production. We also, again, my wish list would have been that we had a better plan for ground cover. Currently, we had planted a native wild, short in height native wild prairie grasses and plants, contracted with our local conservation district to get their assistance. and there is some maintenance involved there. We actually had we cut the brush down at one point before we had planted the native grasses and damaged one of the panels, and we ate that. We replaced that at our own cost. It was no fault of the customers, and it was no fault of the installer. It was just the right thing to do. So for the most part, you know, we cut the grass, we shovel the snow off of it in the winter. We wouldn't have to do that had we put them up a little higher. I would, you know, we were concerned with wind load and engineering aspects of that. So all in all, it's been I like to use the word, or I hate to use the word, but it's been a really elegant installation. There's almost no maintenance whatsoever. Nobody's pouring fuel into it. We're not worried about the cost of natural gas in the Midwest. It's a phenomenal system. We power the equivalent of 22 homes off of it. We're very, very pleased with it. Having said that, would we put in 10,000 more? I don't know that we have the interest locally at this point in time to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. This was great information and so useful coming from, you know, real world experiences and perspective. We can get to more information in the question section of the presentation as well, but I do want to introduce our third speaker today, John Kinch. But before he joins us, I do want to share a great video overviewing the Bertram Solar Park that he helped work on.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
I'm muted though, but yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, great, thanks. Carl and Kevin did a great job providing a lot of information about community solar. And I know we're a little bit short for time. We want to have some time for Q&A. So let me just emphasize a few things about our project and maybe just some things about community solar from our experience and others that we know of through the National Community Solar Partnership, which is run by NREL. We helped Kevin and the Marquette Board of Light and Power bring on the Marquette Community Solar Project. We also did a little bit of help with the Lance Project. And the one that we probably worked the most on is the East Lansing Community Solar Park, which you saw that drone video of. And that was really working very closely with our utility, the Lansing Board of Water and Light, and also working very closely with the city of East Lansing, which actually owns that property, and also working very closely with the community. And I can't emphasize enough that those three legs of the stool are critical to a project to make it work. So you need to have a conversation early with the utility. You need to have conversations with your local unit of government. And then you need to get out there with the community and talk to them and find out if they're interested in such a project. We did something which I still think is relatively smart. We sent out a community survey early in the process of when we were thinking about this and having conversations kind of behind the scenes with the utility and with the city of East Lansing. And that survey asked questions of people such as, would you be interested in a project? Here's what a project looks like. Would you be interested in paying this much for a panel? And we got overwhelmingly positive responses from people that they're interested in having us move forward. And that gave us the wherewithal and the motivation to actually put a project in motion. And it took us some time, and we learned on the way, and we had some mistakes, but ultimately got it completed. What you might not have been able to tell from that drone video of that green area is that while it is in a location in East Lansing known as Bertram Park is a former municipal dump. It's a landfill. And we purposely wanted to locate it on a piece of property that would never have any kind of reuse again, that would be good for, you know, a daycare center or a restaurant or something like that. It's a park, but it's kind of a lightly used park. We wanted to make sure that we didn't change the character of that. So we only have a couple acres out of about a 24-acre site. And we've also done, as Kevin mentioned, they've done in Marquette, we did some habitat restoration. We have pollinators and natural gas or grasses and things like that, with the idea that we're also helping out the environment, not just growing renewable energy. We're actually growing plants that help birds and insects and so forth. So that was an important piece of it. And Kevin used the term right sizing, and I want to talk in my next few minutes about that. One of the important things that community solar does is it brings solar into communities at what I think is a good size, which is 1 to 5 megawatts. Ours is even smaller than that. Ours is only a little bit shy of half a megawatt. And the purpose there is that we have all sorts of dead spaces in our communities. They're known as brownfields, or we have former landfills. And these sites are a liability to our communities. Solar can be located on these sites and turn those sites into an asset. And this way, we're also not competing with properties that should be left natural. We're not competing even with places where we are growing our food. Now, there is all kinds of ways we can locate solar in agricultural lands and do it right. Co-locating solar is a thing. You can have certain crops, you can have certain livestock even that work well with having solar in those sites. But I'm really of the mind that if we can identify more and more of our sites within those places we live, those brownfields, and we can get solar that's 1 to 5 megawatts on those sites, that's a distribution grid, and that provides all kinds of grid services at that scale. It can really help out to shave peak. It can do all kinds of things known as locationality. It can really be an important component of our overall renewable energy system. I say yes to rooftop solar, behind the meter solar, yes, and yes to utility scale. But this is a special niche that I think is underserved, and we should be doing more of it. Carl provided you some stats. Michigan has 7 megawatts of solar. Our neighbor, Minnesota, has almost 700 megawatts of solar. And the reason behind that is enabling legislation, make no mistake about it. And we have a bill right now that's a House, there's 2 House bills that are being considered in our legislature that would do just that. They would carve out community solar as its own thing and put parameters and definitions around it and help communities adopt community solar. So we think it's an important piece of legislation that people should consider and take a look at. I provided to Sarah in the chat a coalition of organizations that are helping to promote this legislation. Michigan Energy Options is involved as well. It's called communitysolaralliance.org. So take a look at that. And I think it's a real important piece of legislation that could make us go from, 7 or 8 community solar parks to having all kinds of these around our state, and especially in those places right now, which are legacy of our industrial heritage, which is a great thing, and our mining heritage and all those other kinds of things in the past, but now are sitting in our communities and they're really underutilized. So with that, I'm going to pause and let Sarah hand it back to the audience to ask us questions. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Again, great, useful information. I did send out the link in the chat to the resource that John was referring to. So I'd like to welcome back all of our previous speakers. If you can share your screen and unmute yourself, we can get into some audience Q&A, and I see some questions coming in. To kick things off, I want to ask, baseline question. A community wants to, start a shared solar farm, and this was talked about a little bit in some of the presentations, but starting from scratch, what should they do? Who should they reach out to? Step 1.
Well, I'll take that real quick. Like I said, we started by having a conversation first with our incumbent utility, which happens to be the Lansing Board of Water and Light. And like Marquette, they're a municipal utility. So there's some differences though in our utility world, right? We have cooperative utilities, which tend to be rural. We have municipal utilities, which are places like Marquette, Holland, Lansing, Traverse City. And then we have investor-owned utilities. And Carl did a good job of distinguishing among those and who's regulated, who's not. But I really think your conversation needs to start with the utility. I would say, secondly, you talk to the folks in local government to see if they're interested in something like this happening in their community. And then I would definitely then go out into the community itself and begin to have conversations with people who may be interested in this or may have some real concerns about it, as Kevin pointed out. And you need to meet people on their own terms, and you need to have the facts, and you need to be transparent. And frankly, there may be some situations where a community solar project sounds like a wonderful idea, but it might not work.
I'll just chime in
Anyone
on
want to add?
I'll chime in on that. As I just alluded to, I'll briefly say again, we were amazed at how much grassroots level support we had. But then when the numbers came out and the cost came out and that kind of, it didn't go away. People who were interested, but once we presented the facts, that eagerness went down quite a bit, and I'm not talking about individuals with buying a panel, but corporations we were seeking support of in that. I mean, they're going to run the numbers and they're going to go, this makes sense for us, or this doesn't, or this fits our model, or it really doesn't at this point in time. So agreed.
Mhm. Great. Community involvement. That's good. We just had another question come in the chat. How can a city with an IOU electric advocate for community solar at the legislative level so that community solar can become one of the city's tools to increase sustainability and reduce greenhouse gas emissions soon?
I would suggest that a one-stop shop would be to take a look at the mycommunitysolaralliance.org, that website. And there's information there where they can contact people who are working within the State House on this very issue. And I think they could be a resource of information to help somebody who is interested in just beginning to have conversations with people who know about this and also can influence it.
Agreed. That's going to have more of a driving effect from above than it will calling customer service or something at the utility. You'll work your way up through there, and you're going to get a lot more attention garnered by the utility when it's coming from above.
The only thing I'll add is that the option of working through the Public Service Commission under the current model, which Ann Arbor did, is a possibility, but I think that also takes a lot of expertise and the legal maneuvers there, and it's also not necessarily the same type of community solar that you might get if we get enabling legislation.
A great resource then. Perfect. I think we touched on this, soon after this person asked this question, but let's reiterate. With communities participating in community solar, the solar gardens that we talked about today, what is the cost to residents participating? And once the payback is met, what type of cost do they see after reaching a point?
I can answer Marquette's experience. The cost was the cost of the panel up front. In our case, we had arrived at the figure of $498 per panel. The second part of the question was, what is the cost after? There is a sunset to the ownership of the contract, a 25-year. It's not a 25-year contract for the panel. It's 25 years of life from the time of the installation of the panel. So if you buy the panel at the 5th year of the garden, in our case, it has 20 years of life left. So the payback for initial participators was thought to be 18 to 20 years. Again, there are many drivers. It's not just to lower my electric bill. I can't tell you how many phone calls I fielded from people that said, how many panels do I have to buy so I don't get an electric bill? Well, you're going to get an electric bill anyway. You're going to get a flat fee. There's still going to be a cost to the utilities. But we did see bills go down for some people quite a bit.
I think what Kevin is saying is right on, and Carl alluded to this as well, that from our experience from both surveying and then talking to participants after we have built the East Lansing Community Solar Park, and we operate and run it ourselves, so we are managing the participants. We have a few that have moved away, and we've had to transfer ownership to somebody else and all the rest, but really the motivation for people is that triple bottom line, that sustainability motivation, where they're looking to do something that may have a kind of economic benefit to them of some kind, but they're also really thinking about their community and the environmental positives of doing something like this. I think if somebody is thinking they want to get into a community solar project just so they can save money on their energy bill, that's probably not the right motivation for it.
I can chime in that those were the ones that probably didn't buy solar panels as well. You know, I agreed, John. We have a lot of people that just felt it was the right thing to do, and an added benefit was a reduction in monthly expense.
I'll add that the idea of an anchor tenant, I think, is something that can be really helpful. And that might be like, for example, I know the city of Ann Arbor is looking for some large entities that might pay more of a premium for community solar, but they get the benefit of saying, hey, we've got renewable energy. And then if you get a significant anchor tenant, you can sometimes pass on some of those savings to some of the lower income households. And there's a lot of different models for how that work where they actually would see more of a financial benefit because you have such a large anchor tenant that's, you know, occupying more space on the array.
Yeah.
So going off of what John had mentioned too, what does happen when, you know, somebody moves? I think both John and Kevin mentioned that there's gifting involved, or you can do various things, but what are all the options if you've purchased a panel for your community or your home, and then you decide to sell and you're going outside of the jurisdiction of your power company?
Yeah, I'll go real quick on that. And I said ownership, but in truth, our model is slightly different than Kevin's. Ours is a lease model, so they don't actually own the panel. They're not realizing the ITC themselves. We had a tax equity investor as part of our project company that realized the ITC. So technically, participants don't own it. They're leasing the right to the energy. It's complicated. You don't really need to necessarily know all that. But if I own my building and I move, what our recommendation is just like if you put in granite countertops, you bake that cost into the sale of your home. So if you've got $400 left on your contract with the utility, add that $400 to your sale price and you'll get your money back out of it, so to speak. If you're somebody who maybe needs to or is moving within the service territory, then you can just transfer that through the utility over to your new address. That works well. In the last case, if you're somebody who doesn't own, you can't bake it into your sale price, you're not moving within the service territory, we have a transferability contract, which basically has you signing off your panel to somebody, or your panel or panels to somebody else. Each of you co-sign that, and then that gets transferred over to that new customer. Whether you give that panel to somebody behind the scenes or charge them something for it, we're agnostic about. We don't want to know. We don't care.
The Marquette Board of Light and Power did not want to become a panel dealer or a panel, we didn't want to be buying them, but somebody bought them and they're like, I don't like this thing, and we didn't want to buy it back and that. So our contract, was pretty clear, but I will be honest, we've had some employment hardship cases and whatnot, and I mean, we've bought several panels back at the going rate based on the life of the panel, and they resell again. Somebody else will pick them up.
Great. And real quick, while I share my screen, I have a quick question for John from the audience. How many acres is the East Lansing project again?
Yeah, so I went through that all kind of quickly. So overall, this Bircham Park area is about 24 acres, and we're taking up about a couple acres where the panels actually exist, that has the fence around it and the rows of panels. And within that site, we have all the habitat restoration we've been doing with planting native grasses and wildflowers and doing that kind of work. And I encourage folks, we're probably running out of the season now, but I would encourage folks, if they're interested in having a tour ever of our site, we have staff would be more than happy to go out there and give you a tour, unlock the gate and let you in behind the scenes. And we have, lovely milkweed and black-eyed Susans and blue stem grasses, and everything is really looking wonderful in there. And the upside of having those pollinator plants in between the rows of our panels is that we don't have to mow. we just let it do its own thing. So we're saving on the maintenance out there, and also we're de-risking the project, because sometimes in some of these solar projects, somebody driving a bush hog or a lawnmower among those panels can clip something, and then you've got a repair you have to make.
Well, I think we are about at time here, and I just want to thank all three of you for joining us today. Such great information that you graciously shared with our audience. I am sharing my screen, and I want to plug our next two webinars, both in October, Eagle's Energy Efficiency Programs and Funding, and how to become a solar-friendly community through SolSmart. And as you head out today, I would appreciate if you could take our quick exit survey, which helps us plan for future webinars. And as always, if you need up-to-date information or want to find recordings, check out michigan.gov/energy. Click on that energy tab and go to communities. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you all of our speakers. Wonderful conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah.